So you have signs. When you're like, this is fucking nuts. What is happening? The very next line should be, this is a high demand group, or I'm in a coercive relationship, or this is fascism, depending on the scale of relationship we're talking about. That should be the very next thing. When there's like lies that are so big that you have to believe them because you can't believe they would tell a lie that big.
Hello and welcome to the Stoner Story Witch podcast. My name is Kristyn. I am so excited to share with you today's episode with my teacher, friend, mentor, Carmen Spagnola. Carmen Spagnola is a Le Cordon Bleu trained chef turned trauma recovery practitioner, clinical hypnotherapist, teacher, and intersectional kitchen witch. She is author of The Spirited Kitchen, Recipes and Rituals for the Wheel of the Year, host of the Numinous podcast, and founder of the Numinous Network, an online learning and support portal for people healing from trauma through a cross-pollination of somatics, attachment, and nature-based spirituality. Her Numinous Network brings the Spirited Kitchen to life with workshops that teach the food, rituals, and creative activities of the Wheel of the Year. These experiences are woven into an ecosystem of support with live wellness sessions, foundational attachment courses, on-demand practice videos, and monthly intuition and spiritual development workshops. Holding space for stability, healing, and renewal amidst turmoil, Carmen's work is an invitation to re-enchantment, soul nourishment, and a deeper and more animistic relationship to the natural world. She provides frameworks and skills to create cultures of collective care in precarious times. And I have been a member of the Numinous Network for over 3 years now, and it is safe to say that this podcast is very much an integration of much of what I have learned and experienced in my time with Carmen and the network. I invited Carmen to come on the show to talk about Severance and relate it to themes of attachment, especially disorganized attachment, and how it is wielded in high demand groups like cults and capitalism as a whole. What does it mean to say that we are living in times of collapse? What does it look like for us to be finding awe and joy and enlivenment and working towards a better future? I also noticed that in editing this podcast, Carmen and I really jump into using the word disorganized an awful lot. We talk about disorganized attachment, the disorganized field. And I want to bring to your attention 2 podcast episodes ago that I had my friend Jamie on, and that my intention with that episode was to be a little bit of an introduction, a little bit of a precursor so that Carmen and I could dive a little bit deeper into this episode. But just a quick overview, when we're saying disorganized attachment, what we really are talking about is this insecure field of attachment. It's characterized by a combination of sort of come here, go away. It's really confusing. It's acting in contradictory ways. It's where there's both a desire for closeness as well as distance at different times. It's often where a caregiver is a source of your fear and also like the source of your acceptance and belonging. And so it's there's a lot of different ways that we can mean it, but when we're talking about it here, we're talking about it in the position of Severance, where I mean, the perfect example is when Mark is wanting to close the door and he asks Miss Selvig, shall I leave it open or closed? And she says both, right? Like it literally can't be both. The door can't both be open and closed. And the whole idea is that in this severed floor, there is cultivating this confusion where Milchek is both the source of love and belonging and the kind eyes and the happy voice, but also is bringing the terror of the break room. I hope that is helpful. Another term that Carmen and I use quite a bit without really officially defining it is the phrase high demand group. And a high demand group is just any social environment that has a significant impact on its members' lives and requires a high level of participation in shared beliefs, practices, and lifestyles. Members of a high demand group are often expected to comply with the group, avoid dissent, and depend on the leader. They can certainly be religious groups, political movements, and often we would think of them as cults. And they are characterized by totalitarianism, which just means that they claim to be the only way. They're also separatist. They promote withdrawing from some larger society. There's high control. So the leader demands complete loyalty and often disregards any sort of rule of law. And then it's highly manipulative. Carmen mentions the word quest and says that I quested with her. And so I just want to add a little bit to that in the summer of 2023, I went on a wilderness quest with Carmen. And what it is an initiation. It's a container of ritual, and it is a solitary 4-day, 4-night solo fast in nature. And what I will just say to it is what drew me to it was the way she talked about an inability to land secure attachment in any of your relationships if you are not able to land secure attachment with nature as our original family of origin. And so when she's mentioning that severance is questy, it is this idea of totally separating yourself from the world that you know and communing with parts of you and the natural world that might only be available in that kind of ritual context. I think that's all I'm going to say about that here, but I just wanted to explain in case you were like, what is quest? I highly recommend it. Obviously, this season is on Severance, and Carmen and I will be referencing the story Severance. So if spoilers are something that you might be sensitive to and you have not yet seen the first season of Severance and you intend to, I invite you to stop and revisit once you are ready. And I also really do want to make this podcast accessible for folks who don't have any interest in putting in that time to watch a pretty dystopian, disorganized drama thriller. So the purpose of this episode is using the story of Severance as a springboard for discussing about the very real issue of disorganized attachment and increasing fascism in the world today, in the real world. And one of the reasons that I am doing a season on Severance is because it is a genre of story that meshes with Hadestown in that it offers a underworld journey. And we mentioned this briefly with one character, but I just want us to think about that that many stories, if not most stories, involve some sort of protagonist character coming to terms with that there is some big lie that they are needing to awaken to, some new way that they need, some transformation that they need to embody, some new way that they need to be in the world, some power that needs to be redistributed. And so I just want to invite anybody that is not interested in watching Severance to still listen along at home and just think about what is a story that resonates with you, where there is some character that is being confronted in some big lie, needs to remove themselves, needs to be severed from that world. And it is really my hope with this particular episode of this season to be inviting us to imagine what is our place in fighting fascism, in creating a more connected world, in inviting that future that we want to be leaving for future generations. I'm offering this podcast here in the hopes that there will be some part of it that resonates with you, some little nugget that you can sit with that can help you find some meaning or coherence in the confusing world that we live in, help you reach for connection in some way. I would love to hear from you. If there are any comments or questions, you can always email me at stonerstorywitch@gmail.com. I would love to know what resonates with you. But without any further ado, here's my conversation with Carmen. Welcome to the Stoner Story Witch podcast.
I'm very excited to be here. I really enjoyed season 1.
You listened?
I did. I really like Little Women. I like you. I like English lit. Anything to do with like English literature and movies. I'm a particular fan of the 1950s Little Women in black and white with Elizabeth Taylor and Greer Garson and all of that. But I also loved, of course, as like a Gen Xer, I love the Winona Ryder one. It was, parts of it were filmed like right in my town. So strong affinity there. Of course, Susan Sarandon, just incomparable, so great. And Saoirse Ronan. I mean, I felt like the retelling was very good. And you did a great job in season 1.
Yeah, a big gift of season 1 for me was like the archetypal like Mr. Dashwood, where it's like just like this idea that there's a story that wants to come out and there's this force that's going to keep that story from coming out. And then I was like, oh, that's like why I'm here. That's like, because I like looking at stories and being like, okay, but what story really wants to come out? Like what's the story that's really wants to be told, but we have these big production companies with multi-million-dollar budgets that have other ideas of how they want to entertain the masses rather than liberate them. But but I don't know, when you just like take that animistic turn towards stories, it just feels so oh my gosh, I'm still feeling very like touched that you've listened to season 1. Oh my gosh, so I'm just and today just really I'm arriving feeling very excited because I really feel like for the last 3 years, I've just wanted to jam with you, recorded about attachment and stories. And it's like, we're doing it now. Like
we
pressed record and we're fucking doing it. I'm so like
offerings up to Mercury that it's all going to work. It's all going to be great.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm favored by Mercury right now. So I'm bringing that vibe.
I appreciate it. All right. So I'm going to borrow from a question that you use on your podcast to just actually officially introduce yourself. And this is from Desiree Attaway. Is it the what identities do you lead with?
That's where I got it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what identities do you lead with, Carmen?
Well, maybe I'll start with the identities that I would presume people think I lead with, which is like professionally, I'm probably seen as like a teacher, maybe to some a mentor. I think those things fit for sure. I'm not going to argue with that. I like those identities. I work at those identities. I enjoy those identities. But what I lead with in my life is like mother, wife, and then probably like white settler seeking to dismantle imperialism and supremacy culture. And like probably in that order, right? Again, I think probably people who follow my work, who know me as someone who teaches about interpersonal neurobiology and attachment would think of me, and maybe even my husband, Ruben, like those names maybe in their mind go together depending on their context of how they came to my work. Other people might be familiar with like the Spirited Kitchen or the Numinous podcast and think, oh, she's an animist witch with an anti-oppressive lens. Those things fit. I like those identities. And it seems like I lead with them in the world because they're so rewarded in capitalism and algorithmically with social media. And I like marketing, so that's like kind of part of it. But yeah, when I like put one foot in front of the other, it's very much thinking about my kid and the world I want to build for them, or my husband and the kind of marriage I want to have, and the land that I'm on and the relationship I want to have with the other than human kin there, as well as the indigenous sovereign stewards.
Yeah. Thank you. It feels really good to hear you kind of like talk about like how I'm seen versus, like how you're actually arriving, or like that there is maybe like discrepancy isn't quite the right word, but that there is like a little bit of a difference. And certainly you're a big teacher and mentor of mine. And I can also tell from being in space with you just how much that like mother, wife, and like, interrupting the imperialist machine is to you. So thank you for diving in that with me.
I would also say that like mother and wife sit a little uncomfortably with my feminist self, who, has grown up in sort of like second and maybe third wave feminism, where it was, really white feminism. And it was, I was shaped in my early 20s by this notion that there was something called like conscious capitalism, et cetera. And so kind of before there was boss babes and all that kind of stuff, there was like, we're reclaiming space for women and like representation, all that kind of stuff. So just like being outspoken in my workplace about gender disparity or things like that, that was a big part of my identity for a long time. So to now be like, I'm a mother and I'm a wife, and that's like, it sounds a little strange coming out of my mouth, but actually I love being a wife. I'm very monogamous. I'm very into, I'm a Scorpio. I'm like really into like, let's go deep. And I often joke that like my marriage is like an eat, drink, fight, fuck kind of marriage. Like it's pretty intense, but I wouldn't want it any other way. And I like being a wife, and I love being a mother. And I'm particularly enamored with being the mother of an artist, and like, an angsty, kind of gloomy artist. I fucking love that. I think it's so great.
So can you just help me out with what is your familiarity with the show Severance? Because the questions that I'm writing are very much relating to the show Severance. And I know you mentioned you watched it, but
yeah, I have a bit of a disorganized attachment with Severance because it's a disorganized field. I'm like, did I see the second season? Have I seen, I think partly it put me to sleep sometimes. It's like whoever is the film colorist, it's like so blue and then so white. And so like it just, everything about it is you are watching somebody in a very disorganized, disorienting field. And so I cannot remember what I've seen. I know I've seen up to the part where the redheaded lady, like, there's the guy in the control room and he's got his like foot on one thing and his hand on another. And then she like wakes up or whatever at the big thing and realizes she's basically being held against her will, as far as I can understand. It's very difficult to track this show, I have to say. Because it's all about, being disorganized, I think. So for me anyway, I found it very disorienting, but I think I've seen the first, and is that the second season? I don't know.
Oh, you have not seen the second season because it doesn't come out until January. So you have seen the entire
there's been one
first season.
It just felt like 2 freaking years. Wow. Yeah. Okay. It was, and I did watch it like, slowly over time. It's not a thing I binged so that I had like a good, really coherent narrative to it. But yeah, I watched it and I've got the gist.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. And I can offer whatever else feels in my intro and outro.
Yeah. So you'll have to do the connection where you're like, and that's like this part in the show. Yeah.
Oh, babe, that's why I'm here.
Okay.
Okay. So I will say my first couple questions are going to be about attachment. Okay. And I've attempted to give some little snippets in previous episodes. I actually had my best friend Jamie on to kind of do a little intro to sort of this episode. But on your Numinous network, and even just a little bit when you were talking about your identities just now, like you really talk a lot about that there's attachment within ourselves to others, you know, like your child and your husband, and to the land. And you even already said like to the more than human. And this show at its essence is it's called Severance, which is like, I would say, the opposite of attachment. And we learn in this show in season 1 that there's this process for reintegration, which again, we could kind of assume is this opposite of severance. And we see Petey undergo this reintegration procedure, and he's like on the run. He's living on his own in a greenhouse, just wearing a bath. Like he's not in good shape. And he ends up dying. Spoiler alert. And, but they tell us, Bragabi, the Black woman who did the reintegration procedure, she says that, you know, he wouldn't have died had he followed the protocol. And as the audience, we don't get to see the protocol. However, given your experience and expertise in attachment and trauma and somatics, like what, off the top of your head, like what do you imagine would be part of that protocol of taking someone who has had such a severance with like the, you know, this one part of them and is entering this like super disorganized field? Like what would some of that protocol look like?
Well, I think the show Severance uses irony and contradiction in really obviously like clever ways through the whole thing. So they call it Severance. When I think of Severance, of course, I think of quest. We've been on quest together. And it's like you go away from the world that you know to undergo this quest. And we can say in many ways, who's the main character guy? What's his name?
Mark S.
Mark S. Okay, so Mark S. is on an underworld journey. He like literally goes into this weird underworld where it's all topsy-turvy. And then we also talk about the return in Quest, where it's like, yes, there is an integration protocol. But of course, I don't want to overly simplify Severance to say it's about the cult of capitalism. But essentially, this is what's happening if we simplify it. So when we say severance, we actually mean indoctrination, right? We actually mean absorption, etc. So when we say reintegration, we actually mean like recovery or purification, if you want to use something as sort of sacred or holy sounding, if we keep this in the context of Quest, which I won't do for this whole show, but it's something that comes up for me as I'm watching it, that I'm like, wow, these are, yes, very archetypal themes. So if we consider that Petey is recovering from the cult of capitalism, we can, to a certain extent, use any of the principles we would use for attachment after any kind of disorganized or disorienting experience. So I think you know that someone I really admire is Alexandra Stain, who wrote Disorganized Attachment in it's called Terror, Love, and Brainwashing, Disorganized Attachment in Cults and Totalitarian Regimes. It's actually a really good book, okay? It sounds intense, but it's actually really good. And I can't remember which episode of the Numinous podcast she is, but she's a very interesting lady. It was before Trump got elected, so it must have been early 2016 or something like that. Anyway, okay, so back to Petey. So I mean, in no particular order, we would want to be helping Petey to rebuild a sense of autonomy and trust in themselves, because people in high demand groups or people in cults, they lose a sense of themselves. They become really dependent on external authority. And that external authority at first is monitoring them, but then they learn how to police and monitor themselves almost as a way to please or, grow connection and bond with the dominating power. So we would need to like gradually introduce independent thought and probably psychoeducation to help Petey understand the dynamics of control that that he's surviving, right? Like understanding how the dominating power used love and fear and deception to manipulate, because recognizing truth from lies is going to be really key. So in our approach as the person helping with reintegration, we would need to be really consistent and really congruent, because in a high demand group, there's so many like arbitrary rules and structures and tasks. So helping people recognize that arbitrariness is a form of social control, and that they have preferences and they can exercise discernment, and that we are okay with whatever their preference is. We're going to stay consistent and congruent with totally honoring that, right? So kind of re-education around consent and all that. And then the slow introduction of like healthy attachments, right? So they were taught these really distorted attachment patterns. And so in Severance, we see like, first of all, keep relationships really superficial. That's what they would want. They're teaching them to keep it superficial and to fear emotional depth and to fear intimacy. But the danger is never quite explained. We don't know why those things are so dangerous, but that's what cults do. They're just like, outside is awful. Other is awful. There's a giant, awful unknown. And we need to be brought into line, right? So we would want to be presencing that consistency and care and congruence, helping them to feel safe and seen and soothed, but also just recognizing that it can feel uncomfortable to have intimacy. It can feel uncomfortable to have depth. It can feel very uncomfortable to reveal the depth of our grief or shame or any other sort of socially taboo emotion, but that it's uncomfortable in a good direction, and that it actually engenders closeness. It actually engenders more security, and you're not going to die. It's not that awful, and you're not going to be outcast. So that's kind of a whole piece. Processing the trauma as so we're kind of doing top down stuff now, but like processing the trauma would be like a whole separate thing. And that would be like very nonverbal therapies. And for some people, it's going to be like a healing modality, right? It's going to be therapeutic tremoring or family constellation. It's going to be something, but for a lot of people, it'll be like going out in nature, ideally with another person, and then we would work to getting into the deeper levels of like what happened. And then like the last step would be like kind of reforming identity, because high demand groups strip you of your personal identity. They dissolve your relationships that were unique between you and another person. They make it so that it's unsafe to have your own preferences. It's only safe to have other people's preferences. And to actually, they manipulate you into thinking that you actually want to be dominated.
Right.
And you want to be cut off. And if you don't want that, then you deserve it. Because, I mean, one of the other things that high demand groups do is they manipulate you and coerce you and force you at times to do things you would be ashamed of doing if you were not in such a vulnerable state. And they force you and manipulate you into lateral violence. Like, note how everybody's always trying to, or not everybody, or certain people are trying to keep other people down, right? You're going to get us in trouble. And so that's like a form of moral injury, right? So there's like a whole thing about like, with moral injury recovery and developing a new identity. Part of that is also reestablishing connections in society and groups. Like that's kind of the last frontier, is being able to not only trust other individuals, but kind of reclaim our space in the collective, be re-enfolded into a collective of care and pro-social sentiment, and kind of reawaken the pro-social part of us that feels like it's okay for me to be part of a we. It's okay for me to be in an us. So, and then like probably the last thing is just like that, then unpacking all the spiritual trauma and the like existential questions that Petey would have about what the actual fuck, why did that happen? All the shame stuff around how did I let that happen? Right? These are all very deep spiritual questions. So it's like a whole thing, this reintegration protocol, in my view.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just keep thinking that like, Petey is living out this like hero's journey fantasy of like, I'm gonna like, he just got awoken to that, like that big lie moment. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I better just like immediately rally these other people who have not reintegrated. Like, it's like, there's like nobody to be a ballast for him because yeah, Mark can't do that because he hasn't so
He's in it. Yeah,
yeah. So
this is
thank
why
you.
before the protocol for reintegration, the hope is all of us have people who are outside this like
Right.
disorganized field, right? You have to maintain contact with people, and sometimes it's even best to maintain contact with people who have known you for a long time or haven't met you recently, like people that that if you were to get into trouble and find yourself trying to dig yourself out, come out from the underworld journey, like Petey, it's like, who knew him before, who could be there,
Hmm.
and so that I feel like he was trying to do that. I can't remember exactly what the storyline was, but I feel like he was trying to do that, but did get caught up in needing to save everyone else. And the thing, it's kind of a got to put on your own oxygen mask first thing.
Right. Yeah. It's like if he would get more disorganized the more he was around Mark because, like it's like you actually might need to take a couple years away
Yeah.
before you can
Mm-hmm.
before you can like go collect your
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so you've talked about this a little bit already, but my other question I sort of wanted to just dive into is if, and for me more than anything is to just like remember that attachment is a state and not a
Mm-hmm.
trait, and that it's like a neurobiological reaction, and that
Mm-hmm.
certainly, yeah, Lumen, we see them cultivating confusion. Literally, like they make them scared of those numbers. Like the work that they do is to just like keep them in like a heightened like emotional response. It's wild. Inability to leave, being lied to, all of that. Um, so we know that nobody's immune to a disorganized field. We also are seeing the rise of fascism unfolding in the world. And so, and I know you have lot of body of work and several podcasts around this, but like, how is it that we can inoculate ourselves against high risk groups, if that's even possible? What is it that we should be maybe on the lookout for? And then I guess the other bit is, what if unfortunately we're in a position where, yeah, like due to the fact that we need to survive in capitalism, maybe like there isn't currently an escape, but like how can we resource ourselves within those systems? If you want to speak more to
Mm-hmm.
that.
Well, okay, so you've mentioned fascism a couple times. So there's like what's happening in the story, as you said, it's like all the hallmarks of this disorganized attachment state that they're trying to place people in. Just a state of hypervigilance, constant threat. They always look exhausted and tired, just on the whole thing. But it sounds like what you're asking is like, how do we inoculate ourselves from fascism, or like what tools are available to navigate this, or like how do we escape this kind of fate? And just to be super clear, I know you know this, but for folks who are new to my work, like there is no escaping fascism. You can
Hmm.
only fight fascism. And so
Right.
if we're thinking of it as a neurobiological response, you have to bring on your fight response. So Petey did that, which is great. Good for him. Flee, then fight. Got it. But the key, especially under fascism, is we have to do it together.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, at sort of the atomized level of two people in a relationship, when it comes to disorganized attachment, you're not going to be able to solve it in an ecosystem of two. In order to develop more secure attachment, you have to throw to an outside resource. I always call it a ballast, and then somebody told me that doesn't make any sense. You're talking about a bollard. Anyway, I've said ballast a million times, a million different ways, but I'm like, I don't know. You have to throw to a resource that's solid and steady,
Hmm.
as if you are like on a tiny little boat out in a stormy seas being tossed about, and you have to like throw to something on shore that's going to like, you'll be tethered to.
Hmm.
So disorganized attachment, like how do we fight fascism at the dinner table? What are like warning signs of we are getting into a disorganized field? I mean, it's a little different at the personal than the collective, but since, Severance is the personal stories of people inside a collective field, I think it's worthwhile kind of thinking of it in terms of the collective. So some of the things we would look for, first of all, like what are the signs, is like when there's kind of this intense validation, or like, collectively we see like riling up of collective outrage, really affirming and validating the people who are in power and people who want to be in power, or there's like a defensiveness or protective sentiment. And in Severance, we see that a bunch with like the way that they keep the creepy house of the founder all said, like, yeah. So the adulation of a charismatic leader, and then that intense kind of riling up of defensive or protective sentiment around them. And, in a couple and two people, it can be intense emotion that's more like love bombing. It can feel like really good at first, but regardless, it's going to feel good, whether it's good because you're riling up outrage, or because you are just like showering somebody with an intense amount of validation. But then after that piece, there's like isolation and separation. I mean, it's called severance. This is exactly what's going on. But in our world, that can also be under the guise of like dividing us up into classes, or like it can also be in like quote unquote good auspices. Like Alexandra Stain in her book, she was in like an eco-fascist group. It was like green politics, and ended up in this high demand community. So it can be under the guise of some kind of collective labor or a shared sense of purpose, which again, they do so great in Severance, because it's like we're all coming to this work and somehow it's so arbitrary and nonsensical, but it's like so important that we do it. And we go through all these rituals of the workplace. And but the main thing that's happening here is we are tying up their time. We're exhausting people and keeping them separate from their trusted, intimate relationships. And they can't have, anything collective that isn't superficial and in service to the higher power. So like, then kind of inside that, when you start to see situations of kind of like blackmail, like the dominating power that's going to like manipulate, coerce, or force people to do these like shameful things. And there's a lot of like group policing there, like, oh, you didn't finish your work, or you didn't, everybody's like staring to make sure that somebody's doing their work, right? It's like, it's sort of like everybody is on eggshells trying to get validation and affirmation from the collective, but the collective is also responsible for like essentially, the good or bad consequences, even though they were powerless to actually really influence it that much, right? So it's this like collective responsibility with absolutely zero collective power or individual power. And then there's like these trial balloons, like in fascism that we're all living through. You see these trial balloons get floated, like it's this gradual escalation, but what they do is they float some trial balloon that's just like so fucking out there. It's so offensive. It's so unthinkable, like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that kind of thing, that it's so outlandish that you sort of can't believe it's happening, and it puts people into a freeze response. And so they like don't do anything for a bit. So when you start to see those things, you should be thinking, I'm in a high demand group, or I'm in a cult. Because the thing is, well, we can talk about this later. The point is, there'll be this gradual escalation. And so you have signs. When you're like, this is fucking nuts. What is happening? The very next line should be, this is a high demand group, or I'm in a coercive relationship, or this is fascism, depending on the scale of relationship we're talking about. That should be the very next thing. When there's like lies that are so big that you have to believe them because you can't believe they would tell a lie that big. That kind of stuff, or just like really extreme outlandish ideas. I want to get to like the other stuff. Okay, so like what tools do we have? How do we get out of this? So as you can probably tell, I fascism is a special interest of mine. So one of my favorite things that I've been listening to go to bed at night is a really short little book. I listened to the audiobook of On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. It's like an hour and 45 minutes. It's like listening to like bedtime stories or parables, but about fighting fascism. And it's so good. So, you know, many of us have heard people say, if you like follow Chani Nicholas or, you know, heard her say, do not obey in advance. I think she said comply, but the quote, his book actually on tyranny says, do not obey in advance. So you see something coming about anything, even if it isn't fascism yet, you're not sure, you just don't obey in advance. You just like make sure that you have a strong tether to your no and you exercise it regularly. Snyder would also say, like, you defend institutions because institutions are just made of people. The institutions aren't going to save you. You have to participate in the institutions. So, you know, that could be from elections to education to your farmer's market, you know, like to where I live, it's like, you know, we need more small scale abattoirs and those all got closed down and now it's big business and now you can't be a small farmer, you know, like it's like find the institution, defend it, take responsibility for the face of the world is another one. Like your symbols, your signs, you know, if you see stickers or flags, like if that is offensive to you, you have to physically take them down. You have to do something else, because if we are managing the collective field and we're managing a disorganized state under fascism, one of the things we look for is are people turning a blind eye?
Right.
Or is somebody with me in this? Are we tracking the same things? And now together we're going to walk up to that business and tear down their homophobic sign or whatever it is, you know, like we have to know that not only are there people who care about us, but they're competent protectors, meaning they're going to put themselves on the line before they let anything bad happen to us. So if you see something, you literally have to do something. And that means you have to stand out. So you have to have kind of cultivated this secure attachment with yourself that no matter what other people say, you fucking know you're right. So it might take you a minute to discern, like, I don't know about what constitutes a genocide. Maybe I have to look up what constitutes a genocide, you know, but then you're gonna protect the language. You're not gonna fall prey to like semantic or semiotic, I think it's called semiotic drift, where we kind of slightly change the language. It's like, no, once you decide, yeah, I think you've investigated, I think that's genocide, you say publicly that's genocide. And you have to stand out and you have to do that. And then there's like the basic things at the collective and the interpersonal level. Snyder calls it make eye contact and small talk, but that's contact nutrition, right? It's like you have to engage in civil society. You need to not only do that because you're trying to present secure attachment for others, but because you want situational awareness. When I say this, does that person respond in kind or do they flood? Are they tensing up? Can I see them gearing up for a fight response? Like what happens when I'm in conversation? This will give you situational awareness about who you can and cannot trust. Like whose door are you going to knock on or not in case of emergency? So we have to like listen for dangerous words. We have to respond to them. We have to do that publicly. There's like, basically, Snyder's last point is be as courageous as you can. You have to develop that secure attachment with yourself so that you can presence it for others. But it also gives you that sense of situational awareness when you are engaging with other people. Who am I going to be shoulder to shoulder with? And who do I actually have to watch my back with? Right. Because, again, it brings us back to like, because there's no escaping these things. And once we're in it, the only choice is to fight. The only choice is to resist. So, there's just a whole bunch of stuff to do to like become the person you need to be to, fight fascism at the dinner table. And the thing is, ultimately, would you rather fight fascism at the dinner table or in the nuclear wasteland? You know, because like in the past, we might have said, would you rather fight fascism at the dinner table or the battlefield? But now there isn't a battlefield. Now there's just like, enfeebled, weakened zealots who are man babies operating drones, right? So you have to fight it in the interpersonal level because it's such an overwhelming technological advantage for the dominating power at the collective level. So this is what we can do is resist where we are, and we resist by being in relationship.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, special interest went on for a long time. I don't know how you're going to edit that.
Probably not. Keep every minute. All right. So my next question, you talked about this a little bit. It relates more to somatics, and you mentioned like top down kind of versus bottom up. So you have a lot of work on the Numinous network that is both like top down, brain to body around attachment and neurobiology, and then also you talk about like bottom up somatic practices. And I saw this in the show in two places, and I kind of feel I'm hoping that this is an Easter egg for like a Jurassic Park moment where it's like the body is not a part of the severance procedure, and it's in the perpetuity wing where like the propaganda that keeps the innies like connected to this sense of meaning and like our work matters. But there's this phrase that says history lives in us even if we don't learn it. And then we also see Mark in a wellness session. And she asks him like mold how you're feeling, and he makes a tree. And we find out that like, you know, we know that even though his innie has no memory of his wife, somehow his body is communicating the significance of a tree to how he is feeling. We know that his wife was killed when her car crashed into a tree, and so his innie is therefore sculpting a tree, and like that's the best he can do, right? And I'm just like, I'm hoping that there's a Deus Ex Machina in that, like a little bit. But my question for you, I guess, is just like, can you just explain a little bit about values and drawbacks in this like kind of top down brain to body, like psychoeducation versus bottom up when we talk about, you know, healing modalities, or maybe we could call it reintegration work?
Yeah, I mean, well, we need both of them, and that's great. I like both of them personally. So when we think about top down, we're talking about things like psychoeducation, information, that kind of thing. So talk therapy would be a form of top down reintegration like approach, right? Now, there's pros and cons, right? So some of the pros of the top down approach is that especially in a disorganized field, coherence is very grounding and it calms the body. Validation, you know, like, yes, I'm seeing what you're seeing and I'm tracking what you're tracking. You know, somebody doing that with you is very settling, you know, so education, information, some commiseration, these are all very valuable. I enjoy them quite a bit myself, and especially people who are like verbal processors, right? It just feels really good to be witnessed and heard and organize your thoughts around things, and then have somebody mirror it back to you and say, like, yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. So that's awesome. The con to that approach is that it doesn't resolve the trauma on its own. So it's not enough. I don't even know if it's half the story. I don't even know if it's 10% of what we actually need. We live in a very, you know, visually and verbally dominant society. So we put a lot of stock in the top-down approach, and that goes back to, you know, patriarchy and all kinds of things. But the con is that if you are using that to resolve your trauma, reading books, going to talk therapy, you're not even, I don't know, you're going to get somewhere between like 10 and 50% of the way, but you're missing this whole other part, which is the biology and the way your nervous system has shaped. There's no difference between your thoughts and emotions on this like neurological cellular level in terms of how many things are happening at once. So you'd be missing a whole important jugular key part of the equation if you didn't do some what we call bottom up. So you need some body-based things that work at the nervous system level, that work at the muscular level, etc. Now the pros to that is that it can feel really good sometimes, right? Like soothing and settling and reconditioning the nervous system and shaping it so that your trauma responses, your threat responses, your startle responses, all of those things are less intense. They last less long. They're like, you know, and they happen less frequently. So like shorter duration, less frequency, less intensity. We love this for us, right? We don't want to be trapped in high anxiety states, global activation states. We don't want to be trapped in survival function. So that feels great. You can also learn how to like rest in states of well-being so that when there is no threat and you're like, okay, great, there is no threat, body can calm down, there is no threat, you can actually rest there and recover. And so that's really good for, that smooths out the digestive system, that smooths out the immune system, the endocrine system, the circulatory system, the attachment system. All those systems need some rest, right? So that's good. The cons to somatics, and there are many, is that so let's just start with one. Again, no particular order, but many traumatized people are in such a deep state of freeze and collapse, like they can't really feel their body. So we call this interoception, right? Like what is happening inside my body. And relearning interoception can feel awful. It feels awful because you are suddenly getting signal that does not feel good very often, because whatever put you into such a deep state of freeze, you're going to have to pass through on your way out to something more mobilized and empowered. So yeah, all the stuff they don't want to see that put them into Lumon or whatever, like they're going to have to come out and see it. So yeah, that can also be really frustrating. It can take a long time. Certain neurotypes may feel like, oh man, like I'm less than human because A, my culture tells me so, capitalism tells me so, and B, I can't even feel my body. It's actually not a problem. There's many different ways to be able to discern what's happening in your body. And it's like a misconception to think that neurodivergence means that you don't have like emotional intelligence, let's say, or the ability to sense or attune. That's totally not true. But you do need to be in skillful care with a practitioner that really, really gets the many different ways that people sense what's going on in their body. And also, in certain cadres of wellness, they would say that like dissociation is, they might not even say it, but the vibe is there that like we poo-poo dissociation, like it's not a good thing and we're trying to stop dissociation. But dissociation does serve a purpose. It's a protective function. And it also, again, it's like a change is as good as a rest, right? It's not the deep restoration of your nervous system, but it does give you a break from threat signal. So when you are in a freeze or extended collapse state for a long time and dissociation is like pretty much the norm, that's just like the way your nervous system is, what it's shaped around now, that dorsal brake gets locked on and it's really hard to turn it off. And it can be a really energy intensive process to turn it off, to kickstart the process of mobilization. And so, like, again, you need like somebody who's very like skillful and patient and compassionate and really understands that. And then the other thing is like, once you get it off, even if you don't have a hard time taking it off, let's say you're a person who's like got quite a heavy trauma history, maybe you can feel all the discomfort all the time. Maybe you don't have a problem at all feeling your body. In fact, you are so attuned to your body that when something feels like safeness becomes the trigger. It's so unfamiliar. So you can get flooded either way from being so finely attuned to all the sensations, or from being so much in freeze that when you come out, it's suddenly overwhelming, right? So flooding is a really common thing. It's like, you have to be held in skillful care to not get re-traumatized in the process of trying to heal. And then I guess the other thing I would say is like people who've been in high demand groups have been lulled into this kind of sense of submission, and they've been manipulated through hypnotic techniques. So it's so amazing that they have her doing guided like affirmations, and they're like so fucked up. When his wife, the wife in the outie world, she's doing the like the wellness session.
Yes.
That's what we call in hypnotherapy a confusional induction. So it's like, say something good, say something good, say something good, say something totally whack that makes your mind go like, record scratch, what? Like, that's weird. What an odd thing. And then they like really ratchet that up in something that's like not part of hypnosis at all, unique to this world that they've created in Severance, where it's like, please no talking, 10 points deducted or whatever. Like they're actually triggering hypervigilance while they're saying we're trying to trigger relaxation. So that is like, they just created the perfect disorganized state in that scene or those scenes. So then after that, you would never want to go into any kind of relaxing wellness thing because you were constantly monitoring for, I'm going to get in trouble if I don't do this right.
Right.
So they do an excellent job of kind of showing the like the danger, the cautionary tale of the flip side of like, you know, having a top down and bottom up approach. They do it perfectly there with like, ooh, ow, okay. So that's the exact opposite of what we would want. But you can see how people would have a tough time recovering from that because the very thing that should help them recover was used against them.
Exactly. Yeah. I like that particular wellness scene. Those scenes just felt very sinister to me because it literally is. Lumon is hiring, you know, before we even like knew the whole, oh my gosh, Mrs. Casey is actually Gemma. What? It's like they are hiring this person to offer wellness, but wait a second, that's absolutely terrible. Like what she is doing. And then, like for the purpose of giving them like just enough, like the weaponizing, like nature sounds, the humidifier, the natural light. But like very notably, like they're stuck on this severed floor, like I am going to tell you who you are. And you should feel pleased, and also don't share these with anyone, and don't feel more strongly over one, like that when you were talking about like giving a sense of autonomy and preferences, it's like there is no safeness you can land here. There is no just like inherent sense of like, you are welcome here. All parts of you are welcome. Mm-hmm. And so I just found myself getting like, I found myself getting really upset in those wellness scenes. So
did I. It was very agitating. I was laughing because I was like, this is the most hilarious hypnosis session I've ever heard. Like, because I understand the confusional induction that like takes people into trance is exactly a cult tactic, right? You want them to not be able to function in the prefrontal cortex. And it's so exhausting trying to track the like illogical logic of this world that your brain goes into default mode network, peripheral processing. If you focus on it too much, you'll realize how fucked up it is. So you just have to relax and let go. And you can see them doing their best to both relax and maintain vigilance because they can't have an emotional response. And when they do, they're penalized. Every single thing of it is weaponized against them. And with the most amazing vocal prosody and and it's like very like, she's just the actress who does that. She's been in so many great things. She's just withdrawn enough so that you're like compelled and allured. And it's like, yes, come in, but not that close, you know? And it's just like, oh my God. It's just so, it was masterful, those scenes, the writing, the lighting, the delivery of the lines. Yeah, they were great, but very agitating from a wellness perspective.
Right. Yeah. So I know we've thrown around the word collapse a little bit, and people who know you well know that like your entire body of work is under this umbrella of collapse awareness. You even have an upcoming book on it. We'll make sure to plug it at the end. But just what I want to focus on is a thing I've heard you say several times, which is absurdity is a hallmark of collapse. And there's a lot of absurdity in Severance that, you know, you can point to or I can point to, but can you just take a couple moments here to just kind of plop down here on the podcast an overview of what is collapse and like what does it mean that absurdity is an indicator?
Sure. So in a very concise way, we can say that collapse is the result of converging emergencies, of large-scale cooperation dilemmas, for which there are no timely solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So all these like huge problems that are totally unwieldy and for which we would need a massive, just an absolutely tremendous, a vast scale of collective cooperation and collaboration and agreement, all coming down in very time-sensitive ways. So they are not problems with solutions. There's no solution to these things. If there were solutions, we would have done them.
Mm-hmm.
But because they're so large scale and they involve cooperation, we're not. So what we actually have is predicaments, not problems. Predicaments are things that we can just respond to.
Mm-hmm.
So absurdity goes hand in hand and collapse. We're living through it for sure in the most like bizarre ways, but we can look at it through history as well. And you'll have to do the job of like linking to Severance because the whole thing just put me into it was hard for me to track that show. And I find that as I get more secure, watching shows like that throw me into a state way more than like my good old armored avoidance self ever did, right? I would have been able to analyze this show so well if I like was my old self.
Mm-hmm.
But now, I don't know, I like fall into these shows and next thing you know, my empathy is so freaking ratcheted up that I'm like, this is very confusing. Anyway, okay. So absurdity and collapse. It's like, you probably heard, your listeners have heard of like bread and circuses, right? The bread and circuses phase of the fall of the Roman Empire was when the average daily life of like the daily Roman was so bad. It was so like, you know, life or death. It was so challenging that every day they were on the precipice of revolt. And so instead what they gave people was free bread and the circuses and gladiators and that kind of bullshit, right? So when you're in the bread and circuses phase of an empire, you know you're pretty fucked. You're in collapse because things are so absurd. And right now it's like things are so meme worthy, right? Like the times are bad, the horrors are atrocious, but the memes are so good. And so that's how we know that we're at the end of empire. And so when reality looks like reality television, and you think about what do they have to do in reality television to like keep us watching? They'd have to ratchet it up to keep us engaged. They have to kind of keep ratcheting the stakes higher and higher. They have to keep doing more and more absurd and outrageous things. When the social sphere starts to look like reality TV, you are well into collapse. And it's so absurd. It's hard to stay with that situational awareness of like, oh shit, because you are in that frozen deer in headlight stage of like, how can this happen? When a reality TV star becomes president and politicians have to become celebrities in order to gain and maintain power, then this is like the spectacle that we see at the end of all empires. So like in ancient Rome, at the end of the Roman Empire, the excesses and the corruption were reaching like mind-blowing proportions. And so that kind of thing where spectacle and cruelty, arbitrary cruelty, predominate the social sphere, it's like right now, as in the fall of the Roman Empire, it's ruled by an oligarchic class of sexual deviants, and their irrational policies are imposed on a whim or because they're being blackmailed by somebody in power, right? It reminds us also of the French Revolution, where it was jaw-dropping disparity, right? Like just the extravagance and the gross inequality was so far, and they just kept testing people in every part of life. Like, how much can we extract? How much can we put them through? So in any society where there's like where the deviant nature of wealth hoarding and power mongering, even if it isn't as fully on display as it is in America, it gets so absurd that you like laugh or you cry. And it's not always like I said, it doesn't have to be as on display as it is in America, with just like the rampant sort of techno bro overlord stuff, and again, all their sexual deviance. We can even think of like the fall of the Soviet Union, where they resorted to like absurd, mind-numbing bureaucracy and arbitrariness, which is more like what we see in Severance, right? So where we have bureaucracy and arbitrariness as a tool to control and to repress. So you keep people so preoccupied with administrative tasks and survival struggles that are really time consuming, that they don't have time for creative thought or, expressions of dissent, right? So like in the fall of the USSR, to buy a loaf of bread, you would have to wait in one line to confirm that there was bread. Then you would go wait in another line to pay for the bread. Then you would go to a third line to collect the bread. And sometimes it wasn't there. So then you'd have to start all over, so like wasting time as a tool of control. It's not just inefficiency. It's a form of repression. So, when you force people to spend hours and days and weeks on just surviving, as we are now, you not only repress their will towards dissent because they're so exhausted, and cults use this all the time, but you also reinforce this idea that you depend on the system for survival. And if you upset the system, you'll draw the attention of authorities, you'll upset it for everyone else, particularly your loved ones. It's just going to get worse for everybody if you kind of knock over the apple cart or whatever. So it's this reliance on something that is also killing you that becomes so absurd that it what else can you do but kind of check out and dissociate and go into freeze? I mean, we know there are other things you can do, but like that's the tool.
Yeah, what I just thought was really interesting was seeing how Mark S's back to Severance, like his sister is pregnant and they're preparing for this baby, and they have all the beds that the baby is going to have they have the crib and the toddler bed, and they're like, well, it's apparently traumatic if kids have to change from one bed to the other. So it's like this like absurd level of coddling to try to like protect your kid from a world where Lumon is severing your family members. It's like, I was just like, this is just dark. And the way that I think, again, it's like, it's wellness. It's like, oh, I'm going to focus on, can I tweak my diet in this way? Can I focus so much on my own health as part of like the healing healthy, right? Like that, then it's like, oh, I'm so busy trying to figure out how to source organic and whatever, all that. It's like, I now don't have any brain glucose left to fight fascism in my neighborhood or house the unhoused people in my community or what have you. Like and so I don't know, that was, I saw that scene. I was like, this is just fucking absurd.
Yeah. So. Whenever you're saying to yourself, this is nuts, this is absurd, what the fuck is even happening? And you're like horrified, but laughing at the same time. It's because we're in collapse. That is right. Collapse. That's a hallmark of collapse. We're in the bread and circuses phase.
Yeah.
The court jester has become the king. And we're like, oh my God,
Yeah. Yep. All right. So, considering how season 2 comes out in January, this just feels like a really liminal time to be exploring the question of how can we collectively imagine a pathway to a more liberated future for season 2. And I think, like I said earlier, I think like a big why behind this podcast is me feeling disappointed by stories that have such an amazing setup. Like, I don't know if you've seen Frozen 2, but Anna.
Yeah, that's the one where they saved the village from the flood or whatever.
Well, so Anna mobilizes herself to destroy the dam and restore the land to indigenous sovereignty and decides to sacrifice Arendelle and the only home and way of life that she's ever known, which I think like could encourage audiences to consider like what might a decolonial future look like. But then like magically the dam waters just like disappear and the king and the kingdom remains just unchanged. She still gets to be queen, and it's just really frustrating. So I'm worried that my hopes specifically for the Helly character are going to get a similar fate because, like Mr. Dashwood, Apple is not going to, I believe, let the story that really wants to be told get out. And we need to find the cracks in the wall. And so, like, we've talked about what it would take for Petey to reintegrate as this worker. But we have Helly here who, like, for a fucking PR stunt is like, I'm going to be severed to, like, coerce people into thinking that severance isn't so bad. Because, like, if Ivanka Trump is willing to do this, then it can't be so bad. And so, like, I need Helly to reintegrate. I want her to grapple with her wealth wound and all the guilt and shame, and yet continue to move forward in solidarity with all the severed workers, even if she, like, needs to resist the call for a few episodes. So I guess my question is, like, if the story that wanted to be told, like that liberated story, got to pick their own writers, are there people or stories that you can, like, kind of point to that would give us some breadcrumbs for, like, what a more liberated future that we could hope for, even if we're probably not going to get it? I mean, I have ideas, but I'm curious if you have thoughts on
Well, okay, there's a few things that come to me. Like, first of all, I would love it if Helly's body, like, developed an autoimmune disorder or something where she just, like, literally couldn't work. And she just literally, like, if they just could not control the body, that's, I would love that part of the storyline where it's just like, oh, look, she gets migraines every time she looks at a computer. What are we going to, like, I don't know. Like, I would love for there to be some kind of, like, stick thrown in the wheel where the body just refused. You know, right. The body just stops because that's what happens. The body will just stop at some point. The body will not comply with this. Eventually you will, develop some kind of physical illness, or you will go insane, or you will have a mental breakdown, or whatever it is. All these things can happen at once. So I would love it if they did introduce just how fucking out of control we are with our own bodies, you know? At some point, Helly's going to have to go through perimenopause, and she's going to be really fucking pissed, even when they put her innie in. Like, it'll be like the hot flash becomes like an absolutely outraged, you know, like destruction of the break room or something like that. Like, I would like to see the will towards resistance and consciousness be like irrepressibly bubbling up, particularly through the women characters, even the Arquette character, you know, like all of them. I want to see them all fucking angry and to the point where, they're willing to self-sacrifice in multiple kinds of ways. I also don't want to, like, be so reductionist to be like, all she needs is love's true kiss or something dumb like that. But I just mean she does need some allies with the contact nutrition. And, like, you know, some kind of thing of, like, a flash of eye contact or a flash of something where they develop, like, eye language where they could, like, figure out a way to signal to each other in, like, a blinking Morse code or something of, like, we got to get out of here. This is what we got to do. And, like, I would love it if some form of communication spread through all the different areas. I just love resistance stories like that. I love the, like, cleverness of resistance. I love the creativity of resistance, you know? So like, I would love to see some class warfare that's, like, really, really, you know, taking the tools of technology and being super creative and subversive with them. And through that, finding self-expression, joy, finding the sense of, well, as you know, in the Numinous Network, we've talked about, like, the Greek idea of virtue and how, you know, the gods used to believe that virtue was, like, one of the most important qualities humans could cultivate. But virtue in Hellenism and ancient Greece is different from what we think now. Virtue then meant more that you have a destiny and you are born with certain gifts that will help bring your destiny to fruition. And your job in your life is to develop your gifts so that they become talents. So the idea of living a virtuous life actually means like you have quite a talent for living your unique life, your personal sense of destiny. And so if we can embrace our destiny wholeheartedly, no matter if it's great or humble, and have that like amor fati, the love of one's fate, and that unless you step into your destiny, you are not experiencing the fullness of your field of possibility. And that every person, well, and this kind of comes, okay, this is in my book, but it's very relevant right now. Okay, but the idea of acorn theory is that there is an oakness to the acorn. The potential to be an oak tree is in every acorn, and it is therefore whole. So even if that acorn falls in like really disadvantaged circumstances, it's still the oak. It's just that it's there in whole potential. And there's something beautiful about recognizing the oakness of your acorn and saying, I'm going to step into it, even if I don't ever get to fully live it out, because it's going to mean I stand out and I'm a target. I'm going to do it because that is my destiny and that is my lot. And I love my lot. And so I would love it if they each had this sense of kind of connection, and through the connection they became more like ventral vagal, more like inspired. And through that, they each kind of found their own gifts and honed them into talents so that they could step into their destiny, which is about performing your inherent function excellently. And maybe their inherent function is to just, be the one who can stretch between two knobs in the door to like make it so that Helly can wake up. It's like, yes, you performed your inherent function. So your whole life was leading to this moment. And it's like such a destined moment. I would love it if each of them got to kind of experience the creativity and the collaboration that comes from connection with other people. And through that, experience the emergent property of possibility that happens. And when people step into and perform their inherent function really excellently, they just like give themselves over to their destiny. Even if Lumon isn't destroyed, they would have to, well, regardless of what Lumon and that whole organization experiences, it's the quality of our humanness that matters so much. And I would like for all of them to experience the ecstasy of stepping into whatever their unique quality of their humanness is.
Right. Oh my gosh, I had a lot of thoughts like with, like Dylan finding out that he has a kid, and then we find out that like Irv has this pain. I have like so many thoughts, but I think like what I'm really holding to is that there is like I'm sitting with like the body's resistance via an autoimmune disorder, and like what that might look like for Helly. And I don't know that she's going to go back to the severed floor, because if she's really like, I think it's like she's doing it for I don't know that she's going to be going through perimenopause on the severed floor. I would like for her to not necessarily like abandon, but I think that the remaining three men are going to, I think the most likely what we're going to see is that they're going to experience another abandonment, like when Petey left. But then my hope for Helly is that, kind of in like Jurassic Park, when the dinosaurs started reproducing in the wild, because like the frog DNA that they used, it comes from frogs that, in nature, if there's an imbalance, they can swap sexual or they can grow the other sexual genitalia. And it's just this, it's that like chaos moment. And it's my hope that there's like somehow Helly's innie is able to reintegrate on its own. And yeah, whether, and then you said love's true love's kiss. Love's true kiss. And I have just been resourced a lot lately with like, Sophie Strand called it like subversive smut. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that is exactly like the genre of story that is visiting me right now. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what if season 2 was just a romantasy? And everything was just a metaphor, and Mark is really just, like that, like they're slaying this dragon, but this dragon, and then, I don't know, it just, there's just like a lot of, so I guess the idea of because that's probably not going to happen, but like, what if she is, just like in some fancy book club, but then she's reading this, and then like her body just like has this, oh my gosh, like this is real, like this is, And then, you know, my hope is that then she would stumble upon the Numinous network and do like all the, because I also just want to say, like, as I was writing the notes for this episode, I was like, literally every question has probably like 3 to 5 offerings that you have on the Numinous network that like relate to it. Like you have an entire course on collapse. You have so much somatic practices and embodied attachment and neurobiology and ritual practices that kind of, yeah, are a, you know, bottom up and top down and all of that. And so, yeah, like I hope Helly finds her Carmen.
Yeah, I mean, we should hang out, right? Yeah, we actually do have quite a few cult survivors in the network.
Yeah.
And it's a very disorienting thing, even when you find safeness, you know, people can like be a little like, whoa, this is so overwhelming. So, you know, there are people who've been in the network for like a couple years who very rarely attend the live functions because that can be a little overwhelming. Even when somebody's like just presencing kindness and like, agency, like you have choices. You can be camera on or off. You can participate or not. We encourage you to, you know, stop, whatever. That even that can be a bit much. And so they probably come in and just like watch the videos. And maybe they, you know, I have received emails from people who are like, I just like knowing it's there. Even though the only thing I really do is the practice portal, which is like the on-demand 2 and 3 minute videos, right? So yeah, there's whether you're like recovering from capitalism or you've got power imbalance in your marriage, you're trying to like surface patriarchy in that, or you're burnt out, or you're recovering from like pretty serious severance type shit.
Yeah,
we've got a lot of different ways in this network to create like something just for you. Yeah.
So yeah, obviously I will link to the Numinous network where people can find you and actually like work in a, you know, like, you know, meet you in a live jam or a embodied attachment or something. But any upcoming offerings or like, I don't know, like a book or something that you might want to just talk about for a little bit?
I don't know, like a book. Yeah, it's kind of wild. I have a book coming out. It's my second book. It's called Spells for the Apocalypse, Practical Magic in Turbulent Times. It's available for pre-order right now, whenever this comes out. It's actually in stores in January 2025, January 14th, which I just had a meeting with my electional astrologer, and they were like, you know, if I had to choose an election for January for when your book comes out, it's January 14th. So
yeah.
it's like, yeah, it's like the universe wanted this to happen at this time, and I kind of just feel like a vessel. So it's a handbook for collapse. And I mean that both like personally and collectively, right? Like for personal catastrophes, like the big ones, right? Death, divorce, job loss, debt, like all those kinds of things. But also for the perilous times we find ourselves in like the broadest sense of like grappling with climate grief and all the social emergencies would come under collapse. So the chapters are organized as 13 rituals and 13 remedies. So by that, I mean the 13 ritual chapters are the calamities or like the challenging states that go hand in hand with collapse. So like there's chapters on anxiety, a chapter on burnout, despair, overwhelm, and others. And it's a very small book. It's like a little giftable book. When I say a handbook, I mean it. It's like a little handbook. Oh. And it's like, it's kind of subversive because it's quite like pretty. They wanted a gift book, and I'm very like, sell them what they want, give them what they need. So I sold my publisher like, sure, I can do a gift book for you, but it's like a gift book on collapse. It's like basically a handbook for radical revolutionary healing and like dismantling systems of power. Okay, so you open it up, it's in 3 parts, and part 2 is the rituals. And so every chapter in part 2 is like a ritual for anxiety, a ritual for burnout, a ritual for despair. You open it up, it's like a little preamble, little context, little pep talk, little contact nutrition, and then here's the instructions for this ritual. And most of the rituals you could do in like 5 minutes, half an hour. Very, very simple. And then the part 3 is the 13 remedies. And the remedies are, they're like quick practices that would foster resilience and like restore steadiness in collapse times. So there's chapters on there's a chapter on awe, one on balance, one on connection, conservation, renewal, wholeness, just to name a few. So 13 rituals, 13 remedies, and all of these rituals are backed by, they're evidence-based practices. They're backed by the current research in neuroscience, psychology, et cetera, et cetera. So it's basically a trauma recovery book. It's basically the handbook. I've kind of just bamboozled this publisher into producing a book that I wanted. I've done this 2 times now. I've tricked them. I'm I would like this book because I have clients and students and people that I want to have this for, and this is the second one. This is basically a handbook for the Numinous network. All the work we do, top down, bottom up, in this little therapeutic companion that's a really small, beautiful package, and it's available for pre-order everywhere. But if you go on my website and you go to carmenspagnola.com and you click on Spells Book and scroll down below all the stuff my publisher makes me post, at the very bottom, it's here's a really awesome bonus that if you buy this book from this Canadian independent bookstore, you get these bonuses. So go check that out. Of course, all the other places to purchase are fine. And I also understand people who have to use a large online retailer. That's totally fine too. And it's very good for authors. So there's no, I'm not going to there's no shame around doing what you got to do.
Right. There's no perfection.
Buy from anywhere. No perfection. That is not what we are. It's not on the menu. No.
Right.
So,
yeah. I thank you for bringing up awe as a remedy, and I have to just name too that in Severance, the defiant awe that we see in Irv and Bert, their little romance, and even though the only art that's available to them is Lumon propaganda, they are so deeply touched, and they connect over that. And so just thinking that there was a resource, and then of course they had to literally build a wall to keep those departments, because of course that's what happens. You got to keep people separate. But
totally.
But it was just I loved that nugget.
Totally. That is exactly what awe does, is it enfolds you into the larger collective. And so, of course, you're going to come into connection. And it's that great feeling of literal slack-jawed, eyes open, ventral vagal, little bit overwhelming, little bit animated, activated maybe, but they bond in that because awe enfolds you into that pro-social sentiment of I am part of something bigger. It's big, I'm small, and I want to collaborate with this. And so they find each other in that beauty. And like you say, they can see past the propaganda and into those things that all humans look for, patterns, right? Patterns of beauty, patterns of light and dark. They love the poignance of it. It's just, And I'm a big fan of poignance when something's beautiful and awful at the same time. And that was very poignant to me.
I mean, it's kind of what we're doing here right now, is it not? The poignance of Severance. It's we are Bert and Irv right now. A little less of the romance, but still just as much love about. Yeah.
Totally.
Oh,
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on my show. I'm hoping to release it on this new moon in Sagittarius in honor of the Mercury retrograde, and Mars goes retrograde on my birthday on December 6th. And so it's just, all of it just feels very Severance. So thank you so much for coming.
It does. Thank you. It's been an honor to be here. And, it's really nice to find little niches where we can just in many, autism and ADHD groups, they'd call it penguin pebbling, oh, this show made me think of you and this made me think of you, and we're passing the pebble back and forth. Remember that part, and we're just info dumping about our special interests. It's really fun. So thank you so much for asking me on the show.
I will penguin pebble with you on any story anytime you want, Carmen. You just tell me which one. I want to thank Matt Shuby for the podcast art, my husband Kevin Carlo for all his help in the creation of the theme song for the podcast, and Aeneas Mitchell and John Williams for their inspiration of Hedwig's theme and Hadestown. And before I sign off, I would like to leave you with a quote from another one of my teachers, Rev. Angel Kyoto Williams, who says, "Love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. And without collective change, no change matters."